Happy Friday, and thanks for spending another week with us here on the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we go over 1 minute of the greatest adventure movie Walt Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston-directed feature, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, an airplane nerd from the Experimental Aircraft Association here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And Jim, we've done it again. We've got another great guest. This gentleman is somebody I'm proud to call a friend. We've known each other, 15 years or a little bit more than that. I first met him when he came to Microsoft to talk to us about the X Prize Foundation and private space flight. And for some reason, he's had the bad sense to be my friend ever since. His name is Erik Lindbergh. And if that last name sounds familiar and you're asking yourself an obvious question, the answer is yes, he is a relation. Charles Lindbergh's grandson, and a noted aviator and inventor and environmentalist and advocate in his own right. So, Erik, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for taking some time to be with us on this one.
Thanks, Hal, and thanks, Jim. I appreciate it.
It's really exciting. I mean, I keep wondering that the thing that when I think about your family, just the whole megillah of it all. Your grandparents were aviation pioneers. I know your dad was involved in basically inventing cave diving with scuba work, and you've recreated your grandfather's flights, and have, as Hal was just mentioning, have been very involved in the X Prize and just creating this new generation of amazing things happening to get people from point A to point B and all the points in between. I keep thinking when you're born a Lindbergh and you wake up every day and everybody goes, "You're a Lindbergh," that you have to come up with something amazing just to keep up with everything. I mean, what has it been like growing up in the Lindbergh family? I know that's a big question.
Well, you know what? That's a huge question, Jim, and I so appreciate it. People have expectations, and that's actually a hard thing. I think growing up as a Lindbergh, I knew there was something cool and different about my grandfather, but it was also kind of a real a burden, if you will. There's no way you can fill the guy's shoes, and I think it for me, it took becoming disabled and then getting another chance at life for me to realize, oh, I don't know if I'll get a third chance at life. I need to live now. And figuring out how to walk in his footsteps without having to fill his shoes was a big issue. And it freed me up to pursue X Prize and help create the private spaceflight industry, and now to push on the electric aircraft industry. It's not all easy being a Lindbergh, but it can also get you in the door. And if you're working on something amazing and cool and fun, that can be an advantage. So it's both.
Wow.
And Erik, I'm always struck, you and I, we've known each other quite some time, and, we've been at a number of the same events and things. I think I've even introduced you once or twice over the years. And I'm always struck at the number of people who want to come up and share with you some vignette about what your grandfather and your grandmother and Morrow meant to them. They want to sort of thank them through you, and they want to express that appreciation through you. And, I know that's something that seemed pretty foreign. I know you struggle with it as a younger man, but I have never seen you be anything but extraordinarily gracious about that. And I think you've given a lot of people a real gift by being open to that sort of feedback.
You're absolutely right, Hal, and it that's a part of that challenge. People come up and introduce you and themselves to you, and you kind of wonder what this is all about. It's not about me. But as I sort of had that evolution of my own spirit and grew into being a Lindbergh and really started celebrating that, it's really allowed me to understand and really smile in the face of interesting, odd, and amazing people who were inspired by my grandparents. And I'll tell you what, they keep coming, and I keep hearing more and understanding amazing things that they did and the ways that they touched people in their lives that was extraordinarily positive. There are, of course, some negatives. Some guy came up to me and said, I didn't like your grandfather. Really? And I'm like, okay, here's a new one. And he said, yeah, I waited in line. I was 14 years old, and I asked him for his autograph, and he said no. And I went, I'm sorry. And this guy's like 85 years old now, and it affected him so much in his life that he told me about it.
Right, all this 70 years later. That's amazing.
Just waiting on that payback is just
that's
a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex legacy, a very intense. Grandfather was perhaps the most famous person on the planet for about 10 years straight, and it was good and it was incredibly bad also. And nobody else had that experience at that time in life when communications it was really the first time that communications sort of instantly spanned the globe. And I think, the poor kid, but grandfather had a policy of not giving autographs or he'd be stuck signing autographs for the rest of his life. And he really wanted to move ahead beyond that flight, the one thing that he was known best for, and try to change the world in other ways. And he did so in so many amazing and extraordinary ways by adopting policies like that, which weren't so good for that kid. And so if you ask me, I'm happy to sign anything.
Exactly. I've got a couple of checks that that I have to ask you to sign. So, we were talking about Charles Lindbergh, and presumably everybody out there knows exactly why we know his name. But May of 1927, so 90 years ago, within just a few days of when this episode airs, in fact, 90 years ago, he won the Orteig Prize by flying solo from New York to Paris. Now, solo wasn't a requirement. It was just he flew nonstop New York to Paris. First person to do that, not the first person to fly across the Atlantic, often misunderstood. Made this flight where others were failing. A couple even died in the attempt. Won this prize that Raymond Orteig very cleverly leveraged his investment in aviation. He put forth $25,000 and hundreds of thousands were spent trying to win that $25,000. Of course, your grandfather won. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, Eric, but as you said, you hit on something very important. He was the most famous person in the world. And I think about this a lot. I've racked my brain quite a bit, and especially here in Oshkosh, we're doing some things involving you, Eric, too, with the 90th anniversary of the flight. I just sat again in our Spirit of St. Louis replica. It was flying just today. We're commemorating that. But I don't think there's anybody you can point to, with the possible exception of maybe a U.S. president here or there. But even still, I don't think that there was a singular celebrity who's been bigger even since. I just can't think of who it would be.
Yeah, it's hard. The mind boggles with it. And of course, I wasn't alive. We weren't alive. So all you can do is really look back at that time in history and sort of immerse yourself in it and think about it. What was it? And for the first time, as I mentioned, communications almost instantaneously went all the way around the globe with radio. And so the globe quickly knew what he had done while all these other people had failed. And as you mentioned, being a solo flight, it may have been an advantage for him to be solo. We know now that some of the competitors for the Orteig Prize fought with each other and they didn't make it. Others overloaded their aircraft and had to build huge aircraft, multi-engine aircraft, and loaded it up with food. And of course, in an airplane, the more weight you carry, the more energy you need, which means you're carrying more weight, which means you need more energy, which is a negative feedback loop. And so going single engine, single pilot, he could control everything with that flight and reduce all the other risks. May have upped his risk of, falling asleep or passing out due to this, sort of stress of it all and not sleeping. But he really figured out the combination of off-the-shelf equipment and in the Ryan Spirit of St. Louis, and then also what he did, cutting the corners off his maps to save weight. Some of his competitors carried champagne and croissants, so they could party when they won, but of course they crashed on takeoff. So it's a fascinating and amazing story. Where he went with that in life and the pressures he faced as a result of that fame were, I think, unimaginable. And Absolutely. That is intense. And it was a barrier for me to put myself out into the public. So that was a part of what I had to sort of break through. Some limitations are sort of external limitations and others are, our personal limitations. And my personal journey was kind of amazing in that I was able to, through disability, I got rheumatoid arthritis at a young age and couldn't walk, became disabled, and then had another chance. And through that, it enabled me to sort of shed all my personal barriers and sort of push through a lot of the external barriers. That has led me on a great journey and enabled me to help with jump-starting the private space industry and pushing on the electric aircraft industry. Really, It's been a great journey. If sometimes hard, it's also been sometimes extraordinary.
Thinking back in the context of this part of this film, The Rocketeer, this is taking place in October 1938, so a little over 11 and a half years after the flight. Actually, Jim, maybe you want to step us through the minute, since you're so good at that, and get us to the point where we're talking about why Erik is with us today.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, we are watching. I mean, as we're watching this movie, we're watching the aftermath of a rather hellacious flight of the X-3 Cirrus rocket through the hangar, and Peavy and Cliff have just turned off the machine, and it seems to be cooling down. As they come up to it, they notice that it's a double-walled chamber that keeps the housing cool so it doesn't explode. It's kind of like very similar to a product that your grandfather sponsored with Robert Goddard. A lot of people don't know about the later life of Charles Lindbergh in American, not only aviation history, but in rocketry. He funded Robert Goddard after Robert Goddard made his record-setting flight in 1926. He contacted an endowment from Daniel Guggenheim. They moved Goddard's entire operation out to the New Mexico desert, and Goddard continued to work on gyroscopic navigation and, more importantly, cooling around the outside of the engine nozzle by pumping the propellant and the liquid oxygen through the actual bell of the engine, which was, that was a major part of Robert Goddard's work. We're seeing a similar thing here, not for the same purposes, but very similar. The X3 on this has a double-walled chamber where there's a rocket engine inside of a cooling tank where the alcohol is flowing around, and that keeps, at least in the sense of this movie, that keeps the engines from overheating and exploding. So we watched Cliff and Peavy try to figure out why would anybody build this giant engine that can cool itself down really quickly, and of course Cliff figures out that the straps are to put on your shoulders and tie it around your waist, and all of a sudden you're ready to go in a rocket belt.
And excuse me, Jim, very quickly, since we know he's listening, but even if he wasn't, Billy Campbell, some of my favorite acting of his in the entire film, and I love the guy to death, start to finish. But right about second 36, he's strapped it on. He's looking at Peavy. He's got this, his eyebrows are up. He's got the sort of wide-eyed look, and then he leans in, and then he gets this tiny little smirk that just starts to turn into a smile as you see the wheels ticking and everything else like that. There's no dialogue. There's no nothing. And to me, it's absolutely inspired, because you know what he's thinking, and he's almost asking Peavy for permission in a way because of that mentor relationship they have. But he's just saying, look how cool this is going to be.
Yeah, and it's that Spielberg push in the camera shot while everybody just kind of stares.
So Billy, if you're listening, did I mention we're fans?
So the reason that the next scene where we finally end that scene is we go out to a flight school which happens to be called Lucky Lindy's Flight School, which is also on the same airport that where the Bigelow Airfield is, in Chaplin Field, and at the time, Lucky Lindy was the phrase Lucky Lindy was synonymous with aviation, and that was Charles Lindbergh's nickname. And fortunately for Cliff and Peavy, they have an instant test subject by a bronze statue of the aviator there that we watched them saw him down and throw him in the back of Peavy's Model T truck, and that kind of just ends the minute there as we watch them drive off with this bronze statue from the Lucky Lindy Flight School. One thing I've always wondered, your grandfather must have missed an awful lot of marketing opportunities for everybody using Lucky Lindy as a phrase, and I know it was used in sheet music, it was used in movies.
They named a dance after him, the Lindy Hop.
Yeah, and
the classic swing dance.
There's St. Louis Airport, isn't that Lindbergh Field?
Sure.
Yeah.
Or
so yeah.
San Diego also.
San Diego, yeah.
San Diego,
St. Louis,
I'm sorry,
I think is Lambert.
St. Louis is Lambert. That's right. I'm sorry. But I keep thinking, gosh, nowadays, Elvis. They have a rights management for the name of Elvis. Babe Ruth even has that. Is there a rights management for Lucky Lindy, or is that just too far in the past to register? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jim. Actually, my grandparents, actually, I should say my grandfather and the people who were around him at that time, including Guggenheim, thought, we need to really protect him from the sharks of that day, the advertising, the seedy, whatever, newspapers and hucksters and so forth. If we thought it was bad today, put ourselves back to the 20s when information was whatever was printed, and the truth might have been a part of that. So, I think, first of all, he hated the name Lucky. So he never would have had anything to do with that, because he prided himself in taking every element of risk out of that flight. That was, modern risk management. He cut the corners off of his maps. He didn't carry a radio. Who was he going to call out there? And so forth. So he ensured his survival by superior planning. When I think about it, of course he was lucky. He flew a right whirlwind engine for 33 hours and it lasted. And he went across the Atlantic essentially blind. Yes, he had some weather information, but there's always a couple of big low pressure systems in the Atlantic. And we know now that he must have been blown around one to the north and blown around the other one to the south. And he ended up right back on course because he held his course with dead reckoning. That's pretty extraordinary. So anyway, there's the whole, his feeling about the term lucky, Lindy. And at the end, when I was a young man, they had a lawyer who protected that name, the Lindbergh name, name, likeness, and signature from commercial purposes. So there was no use of name, likeness, or signature allowed. Of course, people cheated on that, and they sold Charles Lindbergh radios and other things. They would be shut down most of the time, but the ones who asked permission were basically told no, and the ones who didn't kind of got away with it, or got away with it for a while. So it's an interesting thing for our family to deal with, because it's just out there, and people just use it. It's just a part of the legacy. So that's an interesting question.
Erik, you hit on something there too. You talked about how he was a model of, he wasn't just, a plucky young guy who said, kick the tire, light the fire, off I go. And, in the same sense, a lot of people think, the Wright brothers, just a couple of good old bike mechanics who stumbled onto something, and, that's the American way. And it couldn't be further for the truth for either of these pioneers. And something that always struck me, you recreated your grandfather's flight on the, that was the 75th anniversary, right? Does that sound right? 2002? You went to extraordinary lengths to take advantage of every possible thing you could to mitigate the risk. And it does nothing to take away from your achievement to say that obviously, flying a single engine light airplane across the Atlantic is still a huge deal, but it's obviously not as extreme as it was 90 years ago. So you could have gotten away with doing a lot less preparation, but there's a great documentary out there that covers step by step everything you did to prepare, all the training you did. You did the evasion training and wearing the survival suits, having a mission control back in St. Louis, all that stuff.
Sure. Well, Hal, my prime directive was not to fly nonstop across the Atlantic. It was to survive the flight. So
it's always a good goal when one flies.
And I made sure to address the big risk issue that he kind of missed, and that was sleep deprivation. He really didn't get much sleep before a 33-hour flight in a really loud airplane, and I think that was his biggest risk factor. So I made sure I got a full 7 hours of sleep the night before, and I was exercising, so I was looking at physiological issues, and I'll say, the parallels are the most poignant parts of my life. Grandfather, sort of changed the way that the world looked at aviation. Before he flew across, people who flew in airplanes were called barnstormers and daredevils and flying fools. It was kind of crazy. And after he flew across the Atlantic in 1927, people who flew in airplanes were called pilots and passengers, and it really jump-started that commercial era of aviation. Companies came out of the woodworks. Railroads started buying into airplane companies and combining and so forth. And that Orteig Prize, which kicked it off, really people forget that aviation was primarily developed by warfare and by prizes. So in 1996, under the Arch in St. Louis, we took that same message and launched the X Prize. We announced a $10 million prize for the first private manned space program. And of course, in 2004, Burt Rutan and his Spaceship One flew up into space, returned safely, and did it again, privately funded, really jump-starting the private space industry. So I think, the parallels of grandfather's flight and the X Prize, which is now resulting in, we have 3 active companies vying to provide the rocket ships that you and I can go buy tickets on and fly into space soon. It's paralleled in this movie. There's kind of a mythical storyline about discovering this rocket-powered backpack and what it represents. Jim, when you mentioned his eyes, thinking and recognizing this represents personal transportation that doesn't rely on the infrastructure of roads. That's like a hair standing up on the back of your neck realization. And that's where we're at today. I was exposed to electric flight about 10 years ago at Oshkosh Air Venture. And, I've spent the last 10 years trying to help accelerate the development of that industry. And it's right now sort of all coming to fruition with battery development, battery management systems, all enabled by electric propulsion. That's going to really change the way airplanes or air transportation looks. We're not going to be sort of tubes and wings anymore. We're going to, look more like flying cars with that closer resemble drones, but are able to take off vertically and translate and land just like this rocket pack. And that's, I am just so excited to live in this era of technology where some of us like me will get a second chance at life. Plus, we're going to see massive disruptions in some of the bigger industries that we know, like automotive and aviation, and changes in the way we move around the planet. And it's going to get cleaner and quieter. And that, to me, is exciting. It's exciting for the next generation to live into. That's just, I love the parallels of this movie and what's going on right now.
It really is. I mean, there's so many times that people believe that I forget, there's the apocryphal story about the fellow that didn't take the job at the patent office in 1893 because he thought everything had been invented already and we didn't, nothing more needed to be done, so why issue new patents? But we are on so many cusps of such, like things with getting rid of peak generating with the idea of massive storage facilities that you can level out the generation of power, and this is in aircraft, in transportation, in your home, the idea that what happened to, I mean, we all we live in a time when we can remember how much long distance telephones cost, and now we don't even think about who we're calling or where we're calling because it doesn't cost anything. And the idea of having renewable energy. I know we're going far away from the Rocketeer at the moment, but the idea of having renewable.
And we've never done that before.
No. This is our first off ramp. Yeah.
Never walked off on a tangent.
So, but I mean, that the idea that this is happening so quickly that people, like the folks that work behind the X Prize, and people like Elon Musk and other companies that are building the future right in front of us, and the scale and the speed that seems to be accelerating, that we seem to be changing into the future very quickly. I mean, there will be people listening to this podcast, in 5 or 10 years ago, and probably laughing at us for being so excited about things that will be very commonplace to them.
Total. That's the amazing thing, and we really are talking about the movie. A great movie stimulates that conversation. And it stimulates more. It's like what is possible, and a good movie will free your imagination, and that's what Grandfather did. It's what Burt Rutan did. It's what Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos do. That once their imagination is free and they've got the resources to move forward, and some of them are like these guys in the flight school that they're making it up in their garage. They're strapping this rocket pack to a statue, right? Okay, that's kind of low budget. It's like a hack.
Yeah.
And it's a
But
statue that looks a little bit like you, Eric. I gotta
oh,
say.
yeah, well, better at the statue than me.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
I'd like to take that for a spin later, um, once we've gone through a few statues.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
that's the beautiful thing.
yeah, like you were saying, I mean, and it all starts small. I mean, your grandfather back in 1926 took 2 bags of mail, threw them in a plane, and took them from St. Louis to Chicago, and that started the airline that my mom worked for 40 years for American Airlines. I bet it all just started with a little thing, but that little step built up the mail system that we take for granted now. That mail gets thrown into a plane somewhere, or FedEx or whatever gets thrown in, and it's there the next day. It's and all this started with just one small step, and I think that's like you said, we're talking about that in this movie with this one small step, that they're going to try it out and see what's going on with this new thing that they have. Where it's going to go, they're not sure, but like Hal was pointing out, that little glint, that little idea in their eye, that this could be a lot more than what we're just looking at right now.
Oh, and it's totally crazy. I mean, really, grandfather was crazy too. So was Burt Rutan, and so was Elon Musk. You have to be just that little bit of crazy to sort of break through the barriers that you're facing, or figure out a way that it works. And of course, it's crazy until you make it happen, and then it's brilliant. You're hailed as
or then it's even obvious. It becomes obvious, like, oh, of course that was going to work. That was and it looks great in hindsight, but the idea of your grandfather getting in a plane and shooting across the entire Atlantic Ocean and landing in France, that's the week before it was nuts.
Totally, and I think that's the parallel that we've got, here with Cliff and Peavy. It's they are just a little bit crazy, and it takes that, and it's hard. I think when we look at these people who are changing the way we move around the planet, the electric car, personal air vehicle developers right now, they're crazy. And people in our beloved aviation industry are saying, electric, it's not real, batteries are too heavy, blah, blah, blah. It's easy to dismiss these things. It's a lot harder to turn one of those things into a vehicle, and then a vehicle that's safe, and then a vehicle that's safe enough and efficient enough to turn into a business. That's what strikes me so much about building Tesla and, these modern efforts. And of course, I'm a little bit myopic on the electric aircraft industry, but it's finally coming to fruition. We've got some extraordinary personal air vehicles, just like this crazy rocket device, that are coming online. We're seeing them on the internet, and they're still crazy and they're still not real. People are starting to pay attention, but I don't think they have a clue how much this is going to change our lives in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. And looking back, as you said, we're going to be astounded.
Yeah, I mean, a year ago from when we were recording this, I had heard of Tesla. I had heard they're making electric cars. I knew nothing about it. I thought, okay, it's probably some kind of like a go-kart. It runs about as fast as a golf cart, and you can use it to get around the block and then charge it for another 10 hours. But my son had figuratively plugged me into reading more about Tesla, and I wound up standing in line for a first day reservation on the Model 3. And over time, I went out. I thought, I really got to get ready for this. I put a high-powered charger in my garage. I don't have a Tesla, understand? I just have the charger, but there is a Tesla in my garage. It's just the charger. But you
gotta start somewhere.
Having road tests. This isn't a commercial for Tesla, although they are welcome to be an advertiser on our show. I'm always open for that. But
we don't want the Tesla.
yeah, and it's like I went and took a test drive in a Tesla, and when I got out and I had to get back on my old Toyota truck, I felt like I was walking into the past, because I had held the future in my hands. This is how everybody's going to be driving electric cars. They'll bring them home, they'll plug them in like a cell phone. You'll never stop at a gas station again. They get 250, 300 miles on I don't drive 300 miles a day. and the idea that you can plug it in, go have a cup of coffee, and then it's ready to go all over again, and they make no noise at all. As you were saying before, one of the things we don't even notice is noise pollution. We think of things like smoke and water pollution, things like that, but just the idea that the world's going to get a little bit quieter, it's something that it's a quality of life thing that you won't miss it when it's gone. So
you'll notice it though, you touched on a really great point, because noise, I think, is one of the greatest threats to the aviation industry. And we fly a plane and we broadcast noise over a huge area. And if we don't drive the dialogue and develop the solutions to that, someone else is going to. And we in the aviation industry are not going to like what that looks like. I mean, you could just look at Europe and see how constrained their general aviation industry is. That's starting to happen here more and more. And as people are enabled with the world's data at their fingertips with their cell phones and the ability to organize, there's a lot more pressure being put on. And we know now that noise is bad for you. We've known it actually for a long time. It causes heart disease and hypertension. And I think to the extent that people say, oh, I love aircraft noise. Well, great, but not everybody does. And that attitude is that sort of dinosaur attitude. The companies that figure out how to deal with noise are the ones that are going to thrive and survive into the future. The ones that don't are going to go away. That's led to a great relationship for me with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, because they produce a lot of noise because they're training a lot of students, and the community around there would rather not have that noise. And so they see this issue coming to a head, and we're doing some amazing noise work at the Eagle Flight Research Center and partnering with the National Park Service to do noise testing over the national parks because they have issues with noise. I think that issue, also, let me just give a plug for, we've developed a hybrid electric consortium, because one of the stepping stones, just like with automobiles, because the energy density of a gallon of gasoline isn't quite where the energy density in that rocket pack that we're talking about, we're not quite there yet, but it's coming. But it's reasonable to assume that a turbine power plant, for example, that's in the back of your airplane that can be muffled, can power the batteries for the electric aircraft. So we'll have a hybrid, just like a Toyota Prius, to really bridge the gap between all electric, hybrid electric, and then large, all electric aircraft in the future. The hybrid electric consortium, which is large original equipment manufacturers, is mostly concerned with noise, then direct operating costs, then climate change. And it's because those are the things that will shut them down faster than anything. And those are the big pressures that they're feeling. So you've touched on an issue that's huge. And, one of the big barriers to supersonic flight, noise. People just don't tolerate too much of it, which I'm not sure what I'm going to do about all my talking, but maybe you guys.
There's no such thing as too much, Erik. There's no such thing as too much. One thing that really struck me as we're sort of stepping through this stuff, following the conversation as it goes, is we're talking about this movie that was made a little more than 25 years ago. It's set about 80 years ago, 79 years ago, and yet we all take from it this wonderful forward-thinking optimism. Jim, you and I talked to Brian Fees about the World's Fair, the 39 World's Fair, and the tone of optimism that ran through that, and that for a period piece, it's really striking me now just how forward-looking the tone of this movie is. And also, it's unfortunately, sometimes it's an unfortunate reminder of how maybe so many of us lose that optimism from time to time. Whereas here in 1938, going into 39, the World's Fair, all of that great stuff, everything was about looking ahead. There's no problem we can't take on and put our heads together and figure out a way to solve it and make everything better. We don't always have that now, but, forgive a little bit of gush here, Erik, my old friend, but I spend 10 minutes with you talking about this kind of thing, and I get it back immediately. So I'm very lucky to have you as a friend in my life that can always bring me back around to that great forward thinking.
Thank you, Hal. I think too often we can get stuck in the bad news especially if we watch news like the constantly negative news network. We live in one of the most abundant times in history. There are less wars, less poverty, less statistically. The news gives you all kinds of bad news because it stimulates your amygdala in your brain, and you react to that, and they're able to sell, advertising spots. But one of the things that I really learned through my work with the X Prize Foundation is that we really can change the world. And it's hard, but if we apply ourselves, it's absolutely possible. And we did it, and I want to do it again. It's totally addicting. I guess to let yourself go into the negative is just not where I want to live. I've got enough, health issues and drama, family drama, whatever going on that I don't need to accentuate it. The future, I think, is extraordinary. Maybe I'm just way too optimistic, but I don't have the guarantee of living tomorrow or in a decade. And so I really feel like I have to live today, and I have to celebrate and promote and build a brilliant future for the next generation. I think my grandparents did that for me. They didn't always get it right, but they tried. And I want to do that for the next generation. That's just, I think, the way that everybody should operate. And if we turn off the crisis news network and start really focusing on and building that future, the more we live into that. And I think one more, I guess, shameless plug. I gave the commencement speech at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University down in Daytona on Monday. And I'll tell you what, those guys are creating the future that we're going to live into, and those students. And the most powerful sort of takeaway, I think, is when you look at politicians and you get upset, you need to blow it off, because those guys, they're just not as effective as you and I applying ourselves and creating the future. And that's the key takeaway.
I don't know how else to say this, but preach it, brother. That's what it's really. You're exactly right. I can't tell you anything more than amen. It's just the future is coming up so fast, and it's here already. We just have to see those parts of the future that are revealing themselves right now, and push for those parts that we like. I can't agree more.
And of all the epic misadventures we've had so far in the Rocketeer Minute, Jim, I believe I have to go back to my notes, but I think this is the first time we've accidentally started a church. I'm pretty sure.
Tune in next week. Wow.
One never knows.
Yeah. Well, Erik, thank you again so much for being on our show. This has been amazing and very uplifting. And thank you for sharing your life and your family's illustrious history with us. And more to come. I know I can feel that there's more to come. But thank you again. And
absolutely, it's been a pleasure to meet you, Cliff and Peavy, and Hal and Jim. I look forward to next time.
Awesome. I've been mistaken for worse, that's for sure.
Well, for those of you out there who are wanting to join in on this conversation on social media, we are all over the place. Go check us out on Twitter at Rocketeer Minute. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Rocketeer Minute. And also at the big site, rocketeerminute.com, where you can read about this episode. We will also have links to some of Erik's sites, so you can follow on how the X Prize went and where other things are going with the Lindbergh family. So we'll have that on this current episode.
Jim, let me derail you 1 second, because I forgot to mention something. You talked about links to Erik's site. Everybody, do yourself a huge favor. Check out lindberghgallery.com. We will have the link up. In particular, if you like the aesthetic of this film, you will absolutely love some of Erik's rocket sculptures that he has done. Absolutely breathtaking. I'm looking at one on my desk that sits proudly right next to my Rocketeer helmet, as a matter of fact. So anyway, sorry to derail you, Jim.
No, that's right.
You're going, but
you're right on. You're right on the money there. Yeah. No, but please check that out. And also if you want to listen to this wonderful, we have great episodes. And don't we have great guests or what? I mean, this is top notch. I am high-fiving us over here. Now, who knows who we're going to have on next week? Just check us out. But you can subscribe to us on either iTunes or on Google Play. I'm sure there's a bunch of other places that carry us, but you can go in, search for Rocketeer Minute, click subscribe, and you get this delivered hot and fresh every night at somewhere around the stroke of midnight. So check us out next week. Have a great weekend. Everybody be safe. Go try out an electric car. There's a bunch of them out there. You can feel a piece of the future if you go take a test drive. So do that. That's your homework. But we'll see you here Monday, bright and early, on the Rocketeer Minute. So until next time, over and out.
Go get him, kid.